Hello, everyone. We'll just give another couple of seconds before we kickstart our panel.
It looks like it changed the view. Everybody's head is cut off. It's kind of like wider and shorter.
This is how I am. I'm very short. I feel perfectly.
Anyways, so I think let's get started. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on this discussion related to prepping for the new normal. This is part of our boundaryless event, and we are very happy to have all of you join us together. I am Akshay Thakor. I am SVP Operations at Turing, and I'll be the moderator for this panel. We have an amazing set of guests, and I'll quickly introduce them. We have Nellie Hayat, who is the head of workplace transformation at VergeSense. We have Gabe Burke, who is the managing director of Cushman Wakefield. And then we have Hetal Shah, who is the former VP of product and operations at Postmates by Uber. So we have this amazing audience. Welcome, everyone. I want to start all of us together with like a broader question just to understand what all of you leaders think about how do we plan across to this new normal, right? So let's start with you, Nellie. What do you think this new normal looks like today in your experience and all your conversations?
Thank you so much for the question. I think Gabe knows, but I'm very optimistic and opportunistic. So for me, I see it as an opportunity to do better than what we had before. Not saying that what we had was not good, actually. I think there was a lot of progress we're making in American corporate culture. And had to be more intentional, had to be more compassionate, had to think about human first and employees second. But again, this is an opportunity to do better and deepen into those changes that we wanted to make, but they were resistant. And now with the big experiments of working from home, we have this opportunity, this fertile soil to really fast track into building this new normal.
Right. Great. And Gabe, what has been your experience as you've kind of dealt with different leaders across the space? Do you agree with the sentiments that Nellie has shared?
I do, and what I see right now emerging is a culture war. Frankly, I don't think that's an exaggeration. I think that there are quite a few different attitudes about whether or not people belong in the office, to what extent they belong in the office. We're seeing CEOs start to vocalize their opinions publicly. For example, the JP Morgan CEO, Jamie Dimon, has been very vocal about insisting people come back to the office. Mm-hmm. Goldman Sachs, the same thing. Google has hedged a bit. Facebook probably wants people back in the office. Microsoft is being totally flexible. Splunk is being flexible. Netflix, Reid Hoffman is pushing for people back in the office. So you're seeing two sides of this issue. And then, of course, you have the employees who have their own opinions. Some want to be back, some don't. And then there's the issue of hybrid. And so we're watching in real time this debate play out. I don't think we know where it's going to land yet. I think we're going to learn in the coming months. But in the end, the talent will rule the day. And because there's nothing more important than being able to recruit top talent. And if the talent insists on hybrid or remote status, then I think most companies will go that way. But we will have to see. But that's what I'm seeing out there right now, is this great debate that has emerged.
Yep, that's fascinating, and I do agree that we have this ongoing debate between leaders. So let's bring in Hetal and see what his perspective is. So Hetal, you're on the front lines of managing teams, building product for this new normal, and you also had to make decisions to go remote overnight. How has your experience been, and how have you been thinking as a leader to support the teams and also support the business?
Yeah, no, thanks, Akshay, for asking that. I think I completely am aligned with what Gabe shared with the group. I think that companies are trying to figure out what the right new normal is for them. And I agree that really what will drive that change will be the talent. And if companies want the best talent and want a diverse workforce, they are going to have to be flexible. And so from my perspective, I think companies that can provide flexibility to their employees, whether it's a hybrid approach or some type similar to that, I think are going to be the winners at the end of the day. It's going to take some time. It's going to take the right leadership to be able to execute in this new environment successfully, because I think you need leaders that are more mentors and coaches versus managers, right? And I think that requires some training from a leadership perspective to be able to manage a remote workforce.
Makes sense. So Nellie, from when you look at workspace transformation, right? There are two elements to that. One is how do teams think about it? But then it's also about how does leadership need to think about office spaces? They need to think about physical space, and how do you kind of manage that transition? So how have you kind of, what are your thoughts on that matter? Because it's important to address both of them.
Yeah, that's a very deep question. And I think to close on what Gabe and Hetal was sharing, we have many surveys who showed that unfortunately leadership teams are very out of touch with their employees. And this is why maybe we have this war of like what we want at the top and what is the reality at the bottom. And as Hetal mentioned, we're going to need to transform that disconnection and find a way for leaders to be servant leaders to those talents who are the powerhouse of the company. And so workplace transformation, this is where I really spend most of my day with companies, whereas my background was really designing the experience within workplaces. Now it's like, what is the experience that all human beings who will be part of your organization will have the opportunity to live? Whereas they are like, whether they're remote or hybrid or always in the office, how do we make it an amazing experience, an elevating experience, so they grow their skills, their expertise, and their bonding with us, so they can stay with us the longest and they feel fulfilled as human beings and as employees. And it's less, for me, the debate is less about does it happen in the office, does it happen somewhere else, but like wherever it happens, how can we make sure we have the framework for them to go through this growth path wherever they decide to be. And the last point I want to make is like, being in person is something that we all craving right now. And this is something that I think humanity has been craving and will crave forever. So the idea of remote is not to have people separated physically, but it's to really make it intentional when we are together in person. And that's something that we were not having so much before because we had to be in the office every day. And so for some people, there were a lot of negative feelings with this. And so it was impacting the culture. As we move toward a hybrid, and hybrid really means everything and nothing, but to a more of a free system where people are free to choose when they come or not. And managers and leaders have this framework to really enable people to make their choices and still grow in their path. Then what do we do when we meet in person? And this is where we're talking about meaningful experiences, bonding, relationship building, offsite. We're saying like Google was the first one to say offsite will be onsite because the walls are just a container for the human experience to happen. So this is where the question is really today. Makes sense.
And I think this is a lot of the points that you mentioned are things that our leaders, or at least everybody, needs to think and kind of evaluate as they kind of figure out the next step in strategy. We have a great question from the audience directed to Gabe, and I would love to kind of take that up. So one of our audience has asked the question that, Gabe, you said companies will have to listen to the talent. Do you think in your experience that these CEOs are actually going to take these companies' direction, or will they prefer the employer's feedback and what they want to do that? Like, what is your sense in terms of are CEOs actually listening to what employees want?
Well, that is an interesting question, and I think it's a great follow-on to Nellie's point about being out of touch that you just mentioned. There was recently a survey conducted by Littler. Littler is a employment law firm based in San Francisco, And they went out to about 2,000 individuals. Those were lawyers, HR people, C-suite executives.
Mm-hmm.
And they asked them about what do people prefer and what are you going to provide for them?
Mm-hmm.
And there was a clear disconnect between what executives understood and what people wanted. For example, 4% believe that their workers prefer, only 4% want to return to work, but 28% of employers plan to insist that employees return on a full-time basis. 71% would prefer hybrid, but only 55% of employers plan to offer hybrid work. So right now, I would say the answer to that question is I think there's going to be friction. There will be friction between the employers. In the end, I believe that the talent will win. If the talent refuses to come, if it demands hybrid or remote work, then it will get it. But what I don't know is how long that takes to come to fruition. Is that months or years? It's hard to say. But I do think that there will be a period of struggle, and ultimately, what the talent wants, the talent will get.
That's great.
Sorry,
Go for it, Hetal.
No, sorry, I was just going to build on top of that. I think what will drive change is the increase in attrition that the companies see because they don't provide the flexibility, and I think that will take a little bit of time, but and it will. I think the change will come bottoms up, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think if I can add something to it, and that's very much the transformation part that I'm conducting, is the other surveys. So I don't have one now, but that have proven that even employees who want that flexibility and that remote setting say that they're not supported by their company, or they think that their managers are doing a poor job at moving toward asynchronous collaboration or less meeting-based collaboration or even documentation. And so, unfortunately, I think I'm very optimistic in the sense that I believe, like Gabe and Hetal, that changes voices are going to come from the bottom and people are more vocal. But unfortunately, we really need the managers to play along because they're going to be the gatekeepers on whether it's working or not. And so this is why all companies are moving toward or are offering now trainings to their managers on how to be more inclusive, how to prevent proximity bias, how to move away from presenteeism, how to move toward asynchronous collaboration. Because without that, then we are gonna fail. We are gonna fail in building this new normal. And I think for the purpose of this conversation, I think what would be great to talk about is the fact that engineering teams are the teams that are the best, the one that are set for success, because they've learned over the years to collaborate through tools, to document, to not be in the same space, but have access to this open talent around the world, to be in different, like the gaming industry and other industry have been distributed across the globe for a decade already. But again, it's the managerial part that is preventing really to unlock the amazing potential of this.
That's actually great points. And one thing that emerged from this discussion is the importance of managers or functional leaders to kind of bridge this gap between top leadership and the employees. Hetal, what are your thoughts on how can functional leaders or engineering leaders or operational leaders try to bridge that gap? What have you found to be helpful as you've had these conversations with leadership, and how can people push the case to make this a more remote or hybrid workspace?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think sharing kind of the successes that you have within your team and the fact that executing work remotely or with a remote workforce is working and is actually driving, in some cases, even better results because you have, the opportunity to have a more diverse team, I think is really, really important. I don't think it's going to be easy, but I think it's going to be important for leaders, functional leaders, to share those successes and also what's not working well, to learn from that right across the organization and be better kind of the next day, next week, next month, etc.
Great. One insight that we have from Turing is that when we interact with a lot of companies, people are opening more and more to the idea that you can hire talent from anywhere across the world. You can get them from different local markets, right? Gabe, what are your thoughts on how does this impact the global talent pool? And does it also impact the way companies need to think about retaining or attracting this talent pool? And does it impact, like from your conversations, have you had CEOs asking for your feedback and your on thoughts on how to start thinking about improving and retaining such a talent pool?
Well, there's no question it has a tremendous impact. I mean, you can imagine if you're recruiting for a position that you once needed to find someone in the same city or convince them to relocate, and now all of a sudden they can live anywhere in the world, time zones permitting. It is an absolute game changer. I do see some challenges with it, and I wonder how well we can overcome them. The two challenges that I see, one have to do with what you might call due diligence. That is being able to access references, get to know the person without meeting them in person. I think that could create some difficulties. The other thing is that after they are hired, and this is more common about running remote teams in general, I see one challenge for team leaders has to do with inspiring people and making people feel that they are important to the team, and getting them to buy into your vision. If I'm sitting in a room with you, I can look you in the eye and say, we need your team, we need your individual contribution. This is why you're important to us. This is where I'm trying to take this team, this project, this company, etc. It's harder to get that kind of connection, I believe, across video. So I think that's going to be one of the challenges, and I think that could affect to what extent we utilize this great new tool of being able to recruit from anywhere.
Any thoughts, Nellie and Hetal?
Yeah, I was about to share a link to a survey we ran at VergeSense with over 2,000 leaders around the world, and the numbers are showing that the transformation is on the way. Like there was 82% of companies who have hired outside of their office location during COVID, so their population of remote workers within their organization has been growing. So the transformation is on the way again. But again, the focus is like, how do we make it successful? Because what has been shown is also like that first year in a company is so critical. And in a remote setting, there's a likelihood that people feel disengaged, because there's not this framework that will support them, that will highlight their value, their work, their presence, as Gabe mentioned. So really the focus for companies are going to be to not only look at attrition, but it's almost too late. When you realize that your people don't stay more than 6 months, it's too late. So ideally, like what I see forwarding is companies is having tools to identify engagement. How are people engaged throughout their time? What are the red flags that would tell us that people are feeling disengaged, are feeling demotivated, are not feeling supported by their managers? So that can tell me what are the steps I should take to really turn the transformation. Because the goal, again, is not to create trauma over a remote setting. It's really like, how do we encompass remote workers or create the best hybrid model? And really, like, it was happening before COVID. We had this opportunity to do better, but it was happening before COVID. Across all of the tech companies around the world, they had a growing remote population, yet nobody was really in charge of them. Like, it was somehow, I'm sorry, you decided to be remote. We allow for that, but we're not thinking about your experience. And now this is where we have really this change to think, what is their experience of getting the tools and the resources they need? What is their experience of growing and learning within the company? What is their experience of like connecting physically with other person? How do we allow them to book a co-working space or travel and meet their team, or travel and come to the office whenever they feel like want to be part of the physical experience. This is the framework that companies are building to make it a successful model. Because along the way, if we don't make it successful, we're going to leave cadavers behind and trauma. And this is not what we wanted to with the future of work.
No, those are great points. And I would like to, however, bring a distinction, because you mentioned something really important. So companies did have remote work before COVID, but there's actually a distinction. Previously, a lot of companies had globally distributed teams, meaning they still had people. They had a hub, let's say in Asia or in LATAM or in Africa, right? But they still expected people to visit their local office in that space and sit in a co-working space. But today's new normal is actually remote in the literal sense that you and I could be living in the same city, but we would still be working from our homes, right? So, Hetal, from your perspective, how are employees and how are the company's leaders feeling about that? Especially a lot of other functions which are not very obvious, such as engineering could be an obvious thing, but there are operations support functions that you have led and you have been forced to think on how to make that work via remote. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think touching on the second point that Gabe shared about the importance of having people kind of in person when you're, let's say, kicking off the beginning of the year or beginning of the quarter and want to review your strategy and get feedback from your team. I think back to my days at eBay. eBay was and is a global company, and I had, to your point, teams across the world, where in those special times of the year and the quarter, we actually had offsites. We brought the teams together specifically to to review strategy, to get feedback, to get everybody aligned, and to kick off the year or the quarter. And I think it's identifying those opportunities in this new normal to do that, right? And maybe we see teams do more of that now because the teams are slightly more distributed. So I think that's a really important thing to give some thought to. And then, your question about, support teams. So at Postmates, I led a support organization of about 450 people. And then we had another 450 people offshore. At the time of COVID, we had to send everybody home to work and did that in, I think, roughly a week, 5 days, essentially. And I think that it worked well. But it also identified opportunities that we hadn't necessarily thought about, which were, most people were okay working from home. Some people had the desk and monitors to be able to do their work at home. Many didn't, and we, as an employer, we had to think about that and provide them the right equipment to be able to be successful at home. And then there were also some people that could not work from home. So we had to think of ways for them to come into the office, be safe, and give them the opportunity to, be successful at the office. So, I think we think about, generally speaking, that people are okay with working remotely. There are people that just don't have the opportunity to work from home, and we have to be sensitive to that and be able to support them.
That's a very interesting point, Hetal. I think that is something that leaders do need to start thinking about as they kind of adapt there. As we are nearing towards the end of the panel discussion, I want to open up a broad question for all the three panelists. For our audience, which comprises of individuals and leaders and employees of different organizations, what are the one or two questions that, or let's say one question that you would ask leaders to think through as they kind of view their business going forward? What would that be? And secondly, is there any advice or any suggestion you would give to employees in terms of how they can be effective remote workers? Because I think we want to provide benefits to both sides of the audiences, for leaders to think on what pertinent questions they should be thinking about, and for employees to see how can they be more effective at remote work. So why don't you go one by one and give these suggestions to the audience? That would be really helpful to our audience to kind of get those nuggets of wisdoms and suggestions from you guys.
Okay, I'll start it off. The first question that I would ask a manager or a leader, I would say, do you know what your team wants? To what extent do you even understand what each of your individual players needs and is looking for? And it goes back to that disconnect that Hetal and Nellie have both touched on. Before we can seek a solution, we have to start by understanding. And so I would say that is the first place to go, because not everyone agrees. And you have to know what your team believes it wants before you can begin anything.
That's great. And any suggestions for employees who have to be effective remote workers?
Sorry, that question was to me?
Yeah, I want two opinions from all the panelists. One for our leaders and one for the folks or employees who have joined us.
Okay, so for the employees, the question of the leadership is, how do you plan to support remote work? And that has come up, and Hetal and Nellie both touched on that, as well as this, before the pandemic, remote workers were, maybe this is kind of harsh, but kind of the forgotten people in many cases, not always, but in many companies. And they weren't included or got the support that they truly needed. And so, and that has to change, that will change. And so my question as an employee is, what is your plan for that? What is your plan for supporting the remote and hybrid workforce?
Thanks, Gabe. That's super helpful. Nellie, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. My question to leaders, and that's something that I asked before, is how do you nurture your talents' power? How do you nurture their skills, and what do they bring to the company? And if for most knowledge workers, they bring their knowledge and creativity and inspiration, what is the best land for them to really tap into it? And it's rarely within four walls that are not inspiring, but it can be inside an amazing environment, an office environment that is allowing for creativity, inspiration, and bonding. So that's the first question. And look at the talents and how do you nurture what they bring to you?
Yep.
And for employees, the question is like, or the tip is like, be your own entrepreneur. Like, now you're going to be supported by your companies, but you also have to care for yourself, as you're going to have more individual time away from the collective. So how do you care for your mental health and physical health? How do you manage your time? And how do you learn to be really an entrepreneur within a big organization? So you can also feel like you can take risks and share ideas. So that's really my tips.
Makes sense. And then Hetal, you want to round us off?
Yeah. So I'm not sure if I have questions, but I think from a leader perspective, I think the most important thing for leaders is to trust their people. It is so important, especially in this new normal. Focusing on outcomes versus the activity is super important. I think it'll empower your employees, and I think it'll give them ownership and responsibility to be successful. So I think that's my big suggestion for leaders. And then for employees, I think really asking for help more often than maybe you did while you were in the office, right? And also being transparent about your work schedule. Like, with a global team, I think you have to be careful not to overextend yourself, right? With early morning meetings and late evening meetings, you have to find the right balance. And I think it's really important for employees to be able to feel comfortable to share their working schedule with their managers or leaders.
That's great. Thank you, everyone. We are just on time to wrap our panel. This was fantastic discussion. Couple of great insights, and I hope our audience really enjoyed that. Please stick around for this entire event and ask questions. You'll be able to kind of interact with some of our panelists. You'll be able to ask them questions, and we'll be more than happy to kind of reach out to you and kind of give you responses to, or you can connect to all these leaders. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for an amazing panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.